Jake Miller stared at his bank account on his laptop screen and felt his stomach drop. The numbers were getting smaller each month, and his part-time job at the campus bookstore was not enough to cover his rent anymore. His apartment near the university was small, but it was home, and he did not want to move back in with his parents. He needed a roommate, and he needed one fast. He posted an ad on the university bulletin board and several online sites. The response was immediate but disappointing. Most people wanted to party all the time or had weird habits like keeping reptiles as pets. Jake was a simple guy who liked his quiet time to study engineering and play video games. He wanted someone who would pay their share and not make his life complicated. 3 weeks later, just when Jake was starting to panic about next month's rent, a woman called about the room. Her voice was soft, and she spoke very clearly, like she was thinking carefully about each word. She said her name was Zara, and she was an exchange student from Northern Europe. She wanted to see the apartment that evening if possible. Jake cleaned up quickly and waited. When Zara knocked on his door at exactly 7 o'clock, he was surprised by how she looked. She was tall and pale, with the kind of skin that looked like it never saw much sun. Her hair was white blonde and hung straight down her back. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. They were violet, which Jake had never seen before on a real person. She wore simple clothes that looked expensive but not flashy. Everything about her seemed neat and organized. She walked through the apartment, slowly looking at everything but not touching anything. She asked practical questions about utilities and internet and when rent was due. She did not ask about his hobbies or if he had friends over or any of the personal stuff most people wanted to know. The room she would be renting was small, but it had its own window and decent closet space. Zara looked around it for a long time without saying anything. Jake started to wonder if she thought it was too small or if something was wrong with it. Finally, she turned to him and said she would take it. She could move in the next day, and she had first month's rent plus deposit in cash. Jake was so relieved he almost hugged her, but something about her serious expression made him just shake her hand instead. Zara moved in with only 3 suitcases and a large, black bag that looked very heavy. Jake offered to help carry things, but she politely said no thank you. She moved everything herself in one trip from a car that Jake never got a good look at. By the time he glanced out the window, the car was already gone. From the first day, Zara was exactly what she promised to be. She kept her room clean and never left messes in the kitchen or bathroom. She paid all her bills on time and never asked to borrow money or food. She was quiet, and Jake rarely heard her moving around in her room even when he knew she was home. Their schedules worked out perfectly. Jake had classes during the day and usually got home around 4 in the afternoon. Zara seemed to leave for work or school or whatever she did right around that time. She would come back late at night when Jake was already asleep. On weekends, Jake would sleep in, and by the time he got up, Zara was already gone. They saw each other maybe 3 times a week, and their conversations were always polite but short. Zara would ask how his classes were going, and Jake would ask about her research work. She always said it was going well, but never gave any details. Jake assumed she was working on her thesis or something complicated that would be boring to explain. The first month passed without any problems. Jake was amazed at how easy it was to live with someone who minded their own business. His previous roommate had been a disaster who never cleaned anything and always had loud friends over. Zara was like having a ghost for a roommate, except ghosts did not pay rent. Jake started to notice small things about Zara that seemed odd but not bad. She never seemed to cook anything that smelled like normal food. Sometimes he would smell something like flowers or rain coming from her room, but never pizza or bacon or anything he could identify. She bought groceries, but Jake never saw her eat anything. The food would disappear from the refrigerator, but he never heard her in the kitchen. Her room was always completely silent. Jake lived in that apartment for 2 years, and he knew every sound it made. The pipes groaned when someone used hot water. The floorboards creaked in certain spots, but Zara's room was like a soundproof box. No footsteps, no music, no phone calls. Nothing. She never got mail or packages. Jake thought maybe she had everything sent to a campus address, but most students got at least some personal mail. Zara never even got junk mail, which seemed impossible. The strangest thing was that Jake never saw her sleep. He was a night owl and often stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning. Sometimes he would see light under her door at all hours. When he asked about it, she said she was working on her research and liked to keep unusual hours because it helped her concentrate. Jake decided that Zara was probably just very private and maybe came from a culture where people did not share personal things with roommates. He had heard that some European countries were like that. As long as she paid rent and did not cause problems, he was happy to respect her privacy. By the end of the second month, Jake realized he barely knew anything about Zara except her name and that she was supposedly from Northern Europe. He did not know what she was studying or where she worked or if she had any friends or family. But their living arrangement was working so well that he did not want to rock the boat by asking too many questions. Sometimes Jake wondered if he should try to be more friendly. Maybe invite her to watch a movie or offer to cook dinner together. But Zara seemed perfectly content with keeping their relationship polite and distant. She never seemed lonely or like she wanted more social interaction. Jake told his friends about his mysterious roommate, but they were not very interested. They were all dealing with their own roommate problems and thought Jake was lucky to have someone who was clean and quiet and paid bills on time. His friend Matt said Jake was overthinking things and should just enjoy having an easy living situation. As the third month began, Jake settled into the routine of sharing his apartment with someone he barely knew. It was strange, but it worked. And that was what mattered. He had no idea that everything was about to change in a way that would turn his quiet life completely upside down. Jake had been living with Zara for 3 months when everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon in October. His physics professor had canceled class at the last minute because of a family emergency, so Jake found himself walking home 2 hours earlier than usual. He was actually happy about it because he had a big engineering assignment due the next day and could use the extra time to work on it. He climbed the stairs to his apartment and put his key in the lock as quietly as possible. Jake had learned that Zara valued her privacy, and he tried not to disturb her during what she called her work hours. He could hear the shower running in the bathroom and assumed she was getting ready to leave for whatever mysterious job she had. Jake dropped his backpack by the door and headed toward his room to change into comfortable clothes. As he walked past the bathroom, he noticed something strange. The door was not completely closed like it usually was. There was a gap of about 2 inches and steam was coming out from the crack. Jake did not mean to look. He was not the kind of person who spied on his roommate. But as he passed by the opening, something caught his eye that made him stop and stare. What he saw through that gap made his heart start beating so fast he thought it might jump out of his chest. The woman in the shower was not entirely human. Her skin had a strange quality to it that Jake had never seen before. It looked almost like it was glowing very softly from the inside. What he had always assumed were maybe tattoos or birthmarks were actually patterns that moved and pulsed with light. The patterns covered her back and arms like living artwork that shifted and changed as he watched. Her hair was even stranger. It was moving in ways that had nothing to do with the water falling on it. The strands seemed to float and drift like they were underwater or in zero gravity. Jake rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe the steam was playing tricks on his vision, but when he looked again, the hair was still moving on its own. But the most shocking thing was what he saw in the bathroom mirror. The reflection showed things that were not visible when he looked directly at her. There were additional limbs or appendages that seemed to be made of something like clear glass or water. They moved gracefully around her body as if they were helping her wash, but when Jake looked at her actual form, he could not see them at all. Jake stumbled backward from the door and pressed himself against the wall of the hallway. His mind was racing, and he could not make sense of what he had just seen. Was he going crazy? Had he been studying too hard and was now having hallucinations? But everything had seemed so real and clear. He stood there for several minutes trying to process what had happened. The shower was still running, and Jake realized he needed to get to his room before Zara finished and found him standing in the hallway like a creep. He moved as quietly as possible to his bedroom and closed the door behind him. Jake sat on his bed and tried to think rationally about what he had witnessed. Maybe Zara had some kind of medical condition that affected her skin. Maybe she was wearing some kind of special treatment or makeup that he did not understand. Maybe the strange hair movement was caused by static electricity or some kind of product she used, but deep down Jake knew that none of those explanations made sense. What he had seen was not human. His roommate was not what she appeared to be. The woman he had been living with for 3 months was something else entirely. Suddenly, everything started to make sense in a terrifying way. The strange smells from her room that he could never identify. The way she never seemed to eat normal food. The complete silence from her room at all hours. The fact that she never got mail or seemed to have any connections to the normal world. The way her eyes were that impossible violet color. Jake realized he had been sharing his apartment with some kind of alien being. The thought was so incredible that he almost laughed out loud. But the more he thought about it, the more it explained everything about Zara's strange behavior. He heard the shower turn off and froze. What was he supposed to do now? Should he pretend he had not seen anything? Should he confront her about what he had discovered? Should he call someone for help? But who would believe him if he said his roommate was an alien? Jake heard movement in the bathroom and then the sound of the door opening and closing. He listened carefully and heard Zara's footsteps going toward her room. Her door closed with its usual soft click, and then there was silence. For the rest of the afternoon, Jake sat in his room trying to figure out what to do. He could not concentrate on his assignment at all. Every few minutes he would convince himself that he had imagined everything, and then he would remember the glowing patterns on her skin and know that it had been real. Part of him was terrified. If Zara was not human, then what was she? Was she dangerous? Had she been studying him or experimenting on him? Was he in some kind of danger? But another part of him was curious. If she was really an alien, then she must be incredibly advanced and intelligent. Maybe she was peaceful and just trying to understand human life. Jake thought about all their interactions over the past 3 months. Zara had never done anything threatening or harmful. She had been polite and considerate and had followed all their agreements about rent and cleaning. She had never asked him personal questions or seemed interested in anything except maintaining their simple roommate relationship when evening came. Jake heard Zara leave for whatever she did at night. He waited until he was sure she was gone, and then went to the bathroom to look for any evidence of what he had seen, but everything looked completely normal. There were no strange marks or residue in the shower. No signs that anything unusual had happened there. Jake spent the entire night awake thinking about his situation. By morning, he had made a decision. He needed to know the truth about Zara. He could not continue living with someone when he did not know what they really were. But he also could not just ignore what he had seen and pretend everything was normal. He decided he would have to find a way to get Zara to reveal her true nature. He would watch her more carefully and look for opportunities to learn more about what she really was. Jake had no idea how dangerous this decision would turn out to be or how much his life was about to change. Jake could not stop thinking about what he had seen in the bathroom. For the next 4 days, he watched Zara carefully whenever they crossed paths in the apartment. He looked for any signs that might confirm what he suspected, but Zara seemed exactly the same as always. She was polite and distant and gave no hint that she was anything other than a normal exchange student, but Jake noticed things he had missed before. When Zara walked, her feet made almost no sound, even on the creaky floorboards that announced Jake's every step. Her skin looked different in certain lights and sometimes seemed to have that same soft glow he had seen in the shower. Her violet eyes would sometimes catch light in ways that did not seem quite right. Jake started coming home at different times, hoping to catch another glimpse of her true form. But Zara seemed to sense his changed behavior and became even more careful about keeping her door closed and maintaining her privacy. Their brief conversations became even shorter, and Jake felt like she was studying him when she thought he was not looking. The tension in the apartment grew thicker each day. Jake found himself jumping at small sounds and constantly wondering If Zara knew that he had discovered her secret, he had trouble sleeping and his grades started to suffer because he could not focus on his studies. His friends noticed that he seemed distracted and worried, but Jake could not explain what was bothering him. On Saturday morning, Jake was in the kitchen making coffee when he heard Zara moving around in her room. This was unusual because she normally left before Jake got up on weekends. He heard her door open and the sound of her footsteps coming down the hallway. Zara appeared in the kitchen, carrying a large black bag that Jake had seen her bring in when she first moved in. She looked tired, which was also unusual because Jake had never seen her look anything but perfectly composed. She set the bag down on the counter and started to open it. Jake tried to act casual and continued making his coffee, but he was watching Zara out of the corner of his eye. She pulled several items from the bag and set them on the counter. Most of them looked like normal things like notebooks and what might have been textbooks. But there were also objects that Jake could not identify. One item looked like it was made of crystal or glass, but it seemed to bend light in strange ways. Another looked like a small metal device with symbols carved into it that definitely were not from any human language. Jake felt his heart rate increase as he realized he was seeing proof that Zara was not what she claimed to be. Zara seemed to be looking for something specific in the bag. She pulled out more items and set them aside with growing frustration. Jake could tell she was getting upset about something. Finally, she found what she was looking for, and pulled out a small device that looked like it was made of the same strange crystal as the other object. Jake was so focused on watching Zara that he did not notice his coffee cup was overflowing. Hot coffee spilled across the counter and onto the floor. He jumped back and bumped into Zara just as she was putting the crystal device back into her bag. The collision knocked the bag out of Zara's hands and it fell to the floor. The contents spilled everywhere across the kitchen tiles. Jake's normal human items mixed with objects that were clearly not made by any human technology. Several of the crystal devices began to glow and emit soft humming sounds. Jake and Zara both froze and stared at the scattered items. One of the crystal objects was pulsing with blue light and making a sound like wind chimes. Another device that looked like it was made of liquid metal was slowly changing shape on the floor. Zara's face went completely pale, and her violet eyes went wide with what Jake could only describe as panic. She dropped to her knees and began frantically gathering up the alien devices. Her hands were shaking as she tried to turn off the glowing crystal, but it continued to pulse and hum. Jake stood there watching her and feeling like the world had just shifted beneath his feet. There was no way to explain what he was seeing. The objects on his kitchen floor were clearly not made by human hands. They were proof that Zara was exactly what he had suspected she was. "We need to talk," Jake said quietly. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "I know what you are." Zara stopped gathering the devices and looked up at Jake. Her face showed a mixture of fear and resignation. For a long moment, they just stared at each other in silence. The crystal device continued to pulse with blue light between them. Finally, Zara nodded slowly. "I was wondering when you would figure it out," she said softly. "Humans are more observant than we gave them credit for." Jake felt like he was in a dream. His roommate had just admitted that she was not human. The woman he had been living with for 3 months was an alien being, and she had been studying humanity. Everything he thought he knew about his life had just been turned upside down. "How long have you known?" Zara asked as she continued to gather the scattered devices. The blue light was finally fading from the crystal object and the humming sound was getting quieter. "Since Tuesday," Jake admitted. "I saw you in the bathroom. I didn't mean to look, but the door was open and I saw what you really look like." Zara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I was careless. I thought you were at school for another 2 hours. I let my guard down and forgot to lock the door properly." "What are you?" Jake asked. "Where are you from? Why are you here?" Zara finished putting the last of the devices back into her bag and stood up. She looked at Jake with an expression that was sad and tired and maybe a little relieved. "That is a very long story," she said. "And once I tell you everything, there will be no going back. Your life will never be the same." Are you sure you want to know the truth? Jake thought about it for a moment. He could ask her to leave and try to forget everything he had seen. He could pretend this had never happened and go back to his normal life. But he knew that was impossible. He had seen too much, and his curiosity was stronger than his fear. Yes, he said. I want to know everything. Zara nodded and picked up her bag. Then we should sit down. This is going to take a while, and what I am about to tell you will change how you see everything. Jake and Zara sat on opposite ends of the couch in the living room. The black bag was on the coffee table between them, and Jake could not stop staring at it. His whole world had just been turned upside down, and he was not sure he was ready for. What came next? Zara took a deep breath and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something changed. The air around her seemed to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Jake watched in amazement as her human disguise slowly faded away. Her pale skin began to glow with soft silver light. The patterns he had seen in the shower appeared across her arms and face, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. Her white blonde hair started to move on its own, floating around her head as if she was underwater. Most incredible of all were the translucent appendages that became visible, extending from her back and sides. Jake had seen them in the mirror, but seeing them directly was completely different. They moved with grace and purpose like extra arms made of living glass. They were beautiful and alien and slightly terrifying all at the same time. My real name is Zarathul, she said, and her voice sounded different now. It had a musical quality, like wind chimes or distant singing. I am what you might call a scout sent here to observe and learn about your species. Jake found his voice after a moment of staring. What species are you? We call ourselves the Veilter, Zarathul replied. We exist partially in what you would call another dimension. That is why you can sometimes see parts of me that are not entirely in your world. She gestured to the translucent appendages, and Jake watched them move through the air. These help me manipulate energy and matter in ways that your science does. Not yet understand? They also allow me to process information and communicate with my people across vast distances. How long have you been watching us? Jake asked. My people have been studying humanity for about 50 of your years, Zarathul said. We became interested when your species began to develop space travel and advanced technology. Most species in the galaxy follow predictable patterns, but humans are different. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Different how? Most species either become peaceful but stop advancing, or they become aggressive and destroy themselves, Zarathul explained. Humans are chaotic and unpredictable, but you adapt and overcome challenges in ways that should not be possible. You are neither purely peaceful nor purely aggressive. You are something new. She stood up and walked to the window. The translucent appendages moved around her as she talked, and Jake found himself fascinated by their fluid motion. There is a confederation of species in this part of the galaxy, she continued. We work together to maintain peace and share knowledge. For decades, we have been watching Earth and debating whether to make contact with humanity or leave you to develop alone. And you're here to help make that decision? Jake asked. Exactly, Zarathul said, turning back to face him. I am one of dozens of scouts placed around your world. We live among humans to study your behavior and relationships. We want to understand if your species can be trusted with the knowledge of other worlds. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was telling him. So there are others like you living on Earth right now? Yes, some work in your offices, some attend your schools. Some live as neighbors or roommates just like I do. We integrate into human society and observe how you treat each other and how you handle problems. What have you learned? Jake asked. Zarathul was quiet for a long moment. Living with you these past months has been enlightening, she said finally. You welcomed a stranger into your home without knowing anything about me. You respected my privacy and never demanded explanations for my unusual behavior. You shared your resources fairly and created a peaceful living environment. She sat back down on the couch and looked directly at Jake. These are not qualities we expected to find so easily. Most species we have encountered are suspicious of outsiders and demand conformity. but you accepted my differences without question. I thought you were just from a different culture, Jake said. In a way I am, Zarathil replied with what might have been a smile. But the fact that you assume the best about me instead of the worst tells me something important about human nature. Jake was starting to understand the bigger picture. So you're going to report back about what you've learned, and then what happens? The Confederation will decide whether to reveal ourselves to humanity or continue to leave you alone, Zarathil said. If they decide to make contact, it will change everything about how your species sees the universe. If they decide against it, Earth will remain isolated until you discover other worlds on your own. How long will that decision take? It is happening now, Zarathil said. All the scouts are preparing their final reports. The Confederation leaders are gathering to hear our observations and make their choice. Jake felt a strange mix of excitement and terror. And what are you going to tell them about us? Zarathil looked down at her hands. The glowing patterns on her skin pulsed more quickly as if she was thinking hard about something. That is complicated. She said, I was supposed to remain detached and objective. I was not supposed to form personal connections with the humans I was studying. But Jake, living with you has changed me in ways I did not expect. Changed you how? I came here thinking humans were just another species to be cataloged and analyzed, she said. But you have shown me friendship and kindness without expecting anything in return. You have made me feel welcome in ways that I never anticipated. Jake realized that he had grown to care about Zara despite not knowing who she really was. So what does that mean for your report? It means I have to decide whether to follow my original mission or tell the truth about what I have experienced, Zarathil said. My superiors expected me to remain distant, but I have become personally invested in humanity's future. What do you want to happen? Jake asked. Zarathil met his eyes, and Jake saw something there that looked almost human. I want my people to see what I have seen. I want them to understand that humans are capable of great kindness and acceptance. I want them to give your species a chance to join the larger galactic community. Then tell them that, Jake said simply. It is not that easy, Zarathil replied. If I reveal how personally involved I have become, my report might be dismissed as biased. But if I lie about my experiences, I will be betraying both my people and yours. Jake stood up and began pacing around the room. Everything Zarathil had told him was incredible, but he believed every word. The evidence was right there in front of him in the form of her true appearance and the alien devices in her bag. What happens to me now that I know the truth? He asked. That depends on what we decide to do next, Zarathil said. And that decision will affect not just our lives, but potentially the future of both our species. Jake spent the rest of the day asking Zarathil questions about her world and the Galactic Confederation. She told him about planets where the cities floated in the clouds and others where the inhabitants lived in vast underground networks. She described species that communicated through colors and others that existed as pure energy. The universe was far more amazing and complex than Jake had ever imagined, but as the hours passed, Jake could see that Zarathil was becoming more troubled. She kept checking one of her crystal devices, and the patterns on her skin pulsed faster whenever she looked at it. Finally, Jake asked what was worrying her. I am receiving messages from my superiors, she said. They want my final report within the next few days. The Confederation is ready to make their decision about humanity. What are you going to tell them? Jake asked. Zarathil looked at him with her violet eyes, and Jake could see the conflict there. I do not know. If I tell them the complete truth about my experiences, they might think I have been compromised. But if I give them only the facts without explaining what I have learned about human kindness, they will not understand what makes your species special. Jake sat quietly for a moment, thinking about everything she had told him. The idea that the future of humanity might depend on one alien's report seemed impossible, but he knew it was real. Finally, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Then don't just give them a report, Jake said. Show them. What do you mean? Stay here, Jake said. Keep living with me, but as yourself. No more hiding and no more pretending. If humanity is going to join this galactic community, we need to start somewhere. Why not here with us? Zarathil stared at him. Jake, you do not understand what you are asking. If I reveal myself to the Confederation before they make their decision, it could change everything. It might even be seen as interference in the natural development of your species. Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen, Jake said. You said yourself that humans are different from other species. Maybe the way we make contact should be different too. Over the next 2 days, Jake and Zarathil talked constantly about what they should do. Zarathil explained that her people valued objective observation above personal feelings. They believed that emotional attachment led to poor judgment and bad decisions. But Jake argued that understanding a species required more than just watching from a distance. You learned more about humans in 3 months of living with one than you could in years of just observing, Jake pointed out. Maybe that's what your people need to understand. Maybe they need to experience human friendship for themselves. Zarathil seemed torn between her loyalty to her mission and her growing attachment to Jake and humanity. She would pace around. The apartment in her true form, the translucent appendages moving restlessly as she thought. Jake found himself amazed at how quickly he had gotten used to her alien appearance. She was still the same person who had been a good roommate for 3 months. On Thursday evening, Zarathil made her decision. She activated one of her crystal devices and began composing her report to the Confederation. But instead of just sending written observations, she included visual recordings of her time with Jake. She showed them their daily interactions, their conversations, and the way they had learned to live together peacefully. I am not just telling them about human behavior, she explained to Jake. I am showing them what it means to be part of human society. I am demonstrating that cooperation between species is not only possible but beneficial. But Zarathil's report included something else that shocked Jake. She requested permission to remain on Earth not as a hidden observer, but as an open ambassador. She wanted to be the first official contact between humanity and the Galactic Confederation. That is incredibly dangerous for you, Jake said when she told him what she had done. What if they say no? What if they think you have betrayed your mission? Then I will face the consequences, Zarathil said simply. But I believe this is the right thing to do. If the Confederation is going to judge humanity, they should do it with complete information, including what it feels like to be accepted and welcomed by humans. The response came faster than either of them expected. Within hours, Zarathil's crystal device began pulsing urgently. She activated it, and Jake watched as symbols appeared in the air above the device. He could not read them, but he could see from Zarathil's expression that the news was significant. The Confederation has reviewed my report, she said slowly. They are intrigued by my request, and by what I have shown them about human-alien cooperation. They want to meet you. Jake felt his heart stop. Me? Why? You are the first human to knowingly live peacefully with an alien, Zarathil explained. They want to observe this relationship for themselves before making their final decision about contact with humanity. What does that mean exactly? It means we are about to become the most important roommates in human history, Zarathil said with something that might have been humor over the following weeks. Their apartment became the center of the most significant moment in human development. Representatives from several species in the Confederation arrived to observe Jake and Zarathil's daily life. They disguised themselves as maintenance workers and delivery people and neighbors, but Jake could sense their presence. The aliens were amazed by how normally Jake treated Zarathil despite knowing what she was. They watched him make coffee for both of them in the morning and saw how they divided household chores fairly. They observed their conversations about Jake's classes and Zarathil's research and noted how they respected each other's privacy while still being friendly. What impressed the observers most was how Jake helped Zarathil adapt her technology for human use, while she shared knowledge that advanced his understanding of engineering and physics. They were not just living together, they were learning from each other, and both becoming better because of it. Jake's apartment became a bridge between worlds. The Confederation saw that humans could accept differences without fear and could benefit. from cooperation with alien species. They realized that humanity's unpredictable nature was actually a strength that could bring new perspectives to the galactic community. 6 months after that first day when Jake accidentally saw Zarathal's true form, the Confederation made their decision. They would make official contact with Earth and offer humanity membership in the galactic community. But they would do it gradually, starting with the relationship that had proven cooperation was possible. Jake Miller went from being a struggling engineering student to becoming humanity's first alien affairs liaison. Zarathol became the official ambassador between Earth and the Confederation. Their apartment was converted into the first embassy for interspecies relations. Years later, when humans had spread throughout the galaxy and joined dozens of alien civilizations in peaceful cooperation, historians would point to that small apartment as the place where everything changed. They would say that humanity's greatest achievement was not their technology or their courage, but their ability to make a stranger feel at home. Jake and Zarathel proved that understanding between species was not just possible but inevitable when it was built on respect and kindness. They showed that the future belonged not to any single species but to all of them working together toward something greater than any of them could achieve alone.